Ethel Arlene Potter. I was born in 1895 on December 16th.
What was your name then?
Blakesley, Ethel Blakesley. I was born to Jerome and Minnie Smithball Blakesley on the Piranha Road, where Lucille and Ivan Augustine live now. And there was a different house there, but we lived there until 1903 when we moved. My folks, my father, mother, and our 3 children, moved to the next house to the north, where Dad, my father, had built a new home for us.
Mrs. Potter, when were you born?
Where?
When?
December 16th, 1895.
And then after you moved to this new house, what happened then?
Well, before that, I had started school in 1902, so I went to school, started school in Chesaning in 1902, when I was just before I became 7 years old.
Did you walk?
I walked. My mother would walk with me about half the way for quite some time until I got acquainted with children that were going.
How far? Oh, excuse me. How far was it?
Well, it must be 2 miles at least. It was at downtown where the middle school is right now.
Well, tell us some more now about your...
This new house was quite a large house. It had 5 bedrooms in it, and a parlor, living room, dining room, and kitchen. But there was no basement in it. No lights, of course, but we got a telephone before 1910. And about 1910, my father made up his mind, thought he'd like to go to California to live. And so he sold that farm, but then he changed his mind, and instead of going to California, we moved downtown. We lived downtown for a year. In the meantime, he bought the farm, the place that R.P. Mason had owned when he first lived in Chesaning, and the house that R.P. Mason built on the front street. And I thought of it as an old house at that time, but it really wasn't so old either, because the date on the cornerstone is 1849, and we moved there in 1911. It was from there that I went to high school and graduated in 1914. In the meantime, we went to church. Well, I started going to church from down on the Piranha Road, but went to the evangelical church on the other side of the river. But when we moved down to this other farm, my father said he would go to church if we'd all go to the Methodist church. And so we changed, and from then on we went to the Methodist church. The house, Terry, was named, the home down here at the R.P. Mason house was named Terrifile. It was a beautiful home, I thought. It had a parlor, living room, open staircase in the hall, and the 2 bedrooms downstairs, the 3 bedrooms upstairs, a back stairway and the front stairway, and the dining room was 16 by 22 when we first went there. Then the kitchen was behind that, and then a woodshed, and like that. It was a big house, but it burned in 1925. We didn't live there then. Our son Glenn was 1 year old, and we lived down north of town at that time. It burned the same day that the Agnew buildings burned.
Why, did you say you graduated from high school here?
Yes, I graduated in 1914. Mm-hmm. Always went to school down here. You see, I never started any other place. Mm-hmm. Although I could have gone to the West Falls School or the Frink School, because the farm out there was in those 3 districts. Mm-hmm. But my father had gone to school in town, and he was quite education-minded, and he thought it would be better for us to go to school to town, and it was, I'm sure.
What did you do after you got out of school?
Well, I stayed at home some of the time, but I worked at the Burke store for A.H. Burke.
What kind of a store was that?
It was a general store. You had groceries and dry goods. It was where Common store is on the corner now, where the grocery store is. The grocery was back of the dry goods store when I worked there, and I worked there for a while until 1920, I would say, 22, very near 22. I had learned to sew in the meantime because my mother could sew, but she couldn't sew fast enough to suit me, and I liked clothes real well. And you couldn't buy clothes like you can now, ready-made. So I learned to sew. And also one of the things that I did was go to the library, and those as long ago as that.
Where was this library, Mrs. Potter?
It was down further near the bridge. It was very small. There were not very many books.
Was it a public library?
Yes, it was a public library, but very few books compared with what the one is now. And you had to pay so much a week or a month, I guess, or every 3 months, something like that.
Would it be a township library?
No, Chesaning Library.
Chesaning Library.
I don't think they had any help from outside.
You mean financial help?
No, financial help, no.
And did they have a librarian?
They must have had, but I can't remember who it was or anything like that. I know that I could go in there and get books when I wanted them. And I read every book there was in there, I think. The school also had a pretty good library for that time, for that time.
Mm-hmm. How'd you meet your husband?
I met him. He moved to Chesaning in 1918, and I was working at Burke's at that time. He came in about 1920. He came in the store with his mother, and that's when I met him. And that's where that part all started. We were not married. We were married in 1922, and on August the 24th, we were married by a Methodist minister. And we had our wedding trip took us to New York and Watkins Glen and Niagara Falls. We had a real nice trip. We had a Ford car, and then when we came back, we lived down north of town.
And what did Mr. Potter do for a living?
He was farming at that time. His people had moved up here from Lansing. He had worked at the Nova Engine Company before that as a mechanical draftsman. But when he moved up here, he farmed. I didn't tell you that I joined the Methodist Church in 1916, which I was about 20 years old at the time. And I was secretary of the Sunday school for 9 years, just before I was married, too. Then, when Glenn, our oldest child, was when Doris was 1 year old, hardly 1 year old, in 1926, we bought this place and moved here, and we lived here ever since.
Tell us how many children you have. And
we have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl.
What are the names?
Glenn, the oldest, lives in Algonac, and he teaches industrial arts. He's married and has 3 children. His oldest one is in college now, and Nancy will graduate next year from high school, and Jim's will be starting high school about next year.
And
then Doris. Doris was born in 1926, and she was married in 1945. She has 5 children. Only one of those is married, and we have 3 great-grandchildren. 2 2 girls and a boy, great-grandchildren, but Doris has 4 boys and a girl altogether. And they live, well, her children go to school in Hemlock. They live on a farm. And that's about all I can tell you about them, except that they're pretty good kids, all of them. There's something to be proud of, all of them, any of them.
And then Dale?
And Dale lives in Chesaning. He works for the Peat Packing Company. And he's married to Joy Skirting. And they have 3. Jeanette is through high school and works at Hair Manufacturing Company. And Bruce graduates next year from high school, and Karen is in the 6th grade, I think.
Well, you have a very nice family, don't you?
Yes, I do have. We have a wonderful family. They haven't created the disturbances that some children do nowadays.
Well, that's
that may not sound very good.
Well, no, that sounds all right. It's all right to be proud.
Well, then in 1945, I went back to work at Ed Raymond's store. And I worked there for, let's see, I was going to think about that a little more, for about 15 years, part-time. I clerked, sold dry goods, or men's furnishings, and also helped do the tailor work. That's where my sewing came in handy. And after I got grandchildren, I made clothes for them too, which I like to do. I did it more for myself, I think, than for helping them out, because I never had been able to have as many clothes for Doris as I would have liked to have had. And by that time, I got so I could afford to spend a little money on materials. And so I had lots of fun making clothes for the grandchildren. In 1940, the WSCS was formed at the church, and I was secretary for 1 year, and then I became president of the Women's Society, and I was the president for 4 years, till 1941 to 45. And then from then on, I was some kind of officer, either of one kind or another, for 23 years altogether. But about that time, I began to get older, and my health was not so good, so I haven't done so much lately.
What do you do now for a hobby?
I still sew some, but not so much, very much. And I've knit, and I don't crochet, but I have knit probably a dozen sweaters. Other than that, I read. That's about
just like you used to.
Just about like I used to.
Uh-huh. I notice you have a cactus that's blooming.
Yes, it's got one blossom that's just, here it is, June, and it's a Christmas cactus. I don't know what day of the year it is, I don't believe. That is something, again, that's probably 60 years old.
It is.
Aunt Emma Fox brought that from Oregon when she came home back from Oregon in 1910. And she gave my grandmother had it, Aunt Lizzie Brigham had it, my mother had it, and now I've got it.
Well, you repot it once in a while?
Once in a while. Now it's in a bushel basket, and it's got so big that we can't carry it outdoors. It's too heavy for us to handle. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. It's kind of hard. It's kind of a dirty plant because dust gets on it.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and it's awful hard to clean it. All you can do is run the vacuum sweeper over it with a brush.
Mm-hmm.
That don't take it off. If I could take it outdoors and put it under the eaves, it would
wash it
off. Yes.
Well, aren't very many plants around, house plants that are that old,
No,
are there?
there aren't.
Well, it's going to bloom for you anyway. You don't care if it is June.
I was surprised that it's supposed to have quit long ago, but that just Sunday we saw that there.
Did it bloom at Christmas time?
Yes, it started in about Christmas time, but it didn't have as many blossoms as it should have had, really. I guess it's getting too old to blossom, or
probably getting kind of tired.
Yeah, I think so. It's about like its owner.
Well, this has been very interesting. Is there anything else that you would like? Any special things that happened in school or anything, or taffy pulls or sleigh rides that you would like to tell us
I
about?
can't think of anything like that.
What did you do for amusement when you were growing up?
I never roller skated. We used to go to picture shows. I can remember one time when walking home from a picture show on about Christmas time, way down the other side of the river.
Where was this picture show held?
Well, it must have been in the west building of the present sales company. They had a picture show in there at one time. And I remember one thing about it. It was cold weather, and in those days we didn't have boots, or at least I didn't have. I probably, if I had some, I wouldn't wear them. I don't know. But I walked home, and my feet got pretty cold by the time I got home. I remember that.
It was a long walk.
Yes. And I always took my lunch to school, even when we lived up here on Front Street, because I didn't like to come home at noon. It was, you just didn't have time enough to come home and eat and go back again.
Mrs. Potter, did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had 2 brothers, no sisters.
Well, who were your brothers?
Floyd was my older brother. He was born in 1899, and he was married to Lyndall Conklin, and he died a number of years ago. I don't remember just how many years it was now. And Irwin married Vivian Graves, and they lived down north of town, where my father owned property at one time. After he sold the Mason farm down here on the Front Street, he bought 160 acres down on Gary Road, where Lyndall lives, and then also another 50 acres where Irwin and Vivian live now. And that's where we lived when Ed and I were married.
Oh, where you mean where Vivian lives?
Where Vivian and Irwin lived.
Yes, well, it's always interesting to kind of know how the families go together, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have a big family. I have a big family. I mean, my family was a big one, and Ed's was too, so we both have big families.
Mm-hmm. You have lots of cousins.
Lots of cousins. I had 37 first cousins without any husbands or wives.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But we used to have some real good times. We had Christmas gatherings, and we'd get together on Christmas Day, and the Fox family, Calvin and Emma Fox, that was Mother's sister, her husband, Aunt Lizzie Brigham and Uncle Sumner, Helen Brigham's father and mother, and we all went to the Methodist church, and we did just like we do now. We talked when we came out of church, and sometimes Mother would say, "Come on, go home with us for dinner." Sometimes Aunt Lizzie would say that, or again Aunt Emma would say that. And so we saw each other quite frequently, and the families always got along real well together.
Well, that's wonderful to have families that get along.
Yes, I know it is.
Yes, it is.
Our daughter-in-law, Glenn's wife, made the remark one time, "I never thought I would marry into a family that got along with each other so well." I thought that was quite a compliment
Yes,
to
it
the whole
is.
family.
It is a compliment. It's a wonderful thing because there's often so much jealousy and bickering in families.
Sometimes when somebody has a better job than another, why somebody's hurt, or feels as if they wasn't having it quite so easy. But I don't think there's any of that in our family at all. And then Ed has just as big a family, so with it all, we just
Have lots of
have
friends.
lots of friends and lots of family. See, he was related to that Miller family where Ann Miller died last week, and Lawrence Miller's, the husband's mother, was Ed's first cousin.
Oh, I see.
So, and that was a big funeral and big family there to see too. And some things. Oh, we're putting things on there that isn't really necessary, I guess.
It's all interesting, you know.
To you and I, maybe.
Yeah, well, you can't tell.